Hello everyone, this is Joni, and I'm glad to finally be back in front of the camera again. And as you can probably see, I still can't wear makeup on my nose because it still hasn't completely healed. And but it's getting there, and he said it would possibly be another month before it really got completely healed. I think my camera's over just a little bit. Okay. But I had promised you the last time that I was on that I would come back and just talk with you if I still couldn't wear my glasses, which I can't. As you can see, I'm holding them like this. I still can't put them on the nose because it makes so much pressure, and this office chair is supposed to be comfortable, but it really isn't all that comfortable. I just sort of scoot out of it. I don't know why. But anyway, it's nice to be back, and I hope that all of you all have been getting along really well. I've been watching your videos and things, and like I said the last time, you all have been entertaining me, and that's good because I have sure needed entertainment. And I have just started yesterday trying to decorate a little bit for Easter, and don't have much of it put up at all, and I really have not gone into an elaborate decoration for Easter before. I had some things up in the living room and the dining room and the kitchen, but not a whole big bunch, but I just put a few little things there that I hope that you'll like them when you see them, because like I said, I don't have much of them up yet because I started decorating, and then I started not feeling too well, so I just, I'm having problems with my blood sugar. Instead of having high sugar problems, I think that I'm hypoglycemic, and that's what my father had. And it falls. I'll just be sitting there, and all of a sudden my sugar will just start falling. And I even have a video one time. I sat down and started making a video, and my sugar started falling. And I said, well, I said, I'm in the process of my sugar is falling, my blood sugar. And I just become severely weak and dizzy, and I have to get something to eat pretty soon, or it's not a very pleasant thing. My father passed away from that because he passed away in 68. I had said something about him before, and I said he passed away in 65. It wasn't 65, it was 68. And I knew that at the time, but I said, in my mind, I was saying 68, but what came out was 65. But he passed away in 68. And there wasn't all that much research done and back to the patients. I'm sure that probably the doctors knew the things, but it just didn't get back to the patients that fast. And so he would just go into a... he was fine, but his face would look like he had a sunburn all the time. And I'd look at him and I'd say, Daddy, I say, you look like you've been out in the sun. Have you been out in the sun a lot? Because you look like you had a sunburn. No, I haven't been out in the sun. It just sort of seems to stay that way. And now that I am aware of what was going on with him, I can see that. And it's not a good thing to have. And then he started having going into a coma at night. He would go to sleep and he wouldn't even know anything was wrong, and he would just go into a coma. And when he would wake up, he would not know anything had happened if it had not been for the fact that my mother was there with him, and she knew that she couldn't get him awake or anything. And so he went into one of those comas one night, and evidently it must have thrown him into a heart attack, and he passed away. And that was very, very devastating because he was one of the family members. He was just it. That's all you can say. He was the main peg there. He and Mom right beside him, because when you saw one, you saw both of them, because they were never separated for any period of time, because in his earlier life, he had been a teacher, and he taught for a good while, and then he went into service, and he came out a lieutenant, and he went from there he became an attorney, and he was continually learning. He loved to learn. I think that's where I get this from. I love to learn, and I love to read and all of these things, and I think that's where I get it from. I think I get it from Daddy. Mommy, she was happy if she had the kitchen stove and her stuff that she wanted to cook, and she would go in there, and her dishes and her clothes, and she was a typical housewife if you ever saw one, because that's what she loved doing, taking care of her children and her husband, and she was very, very happy. But Daddy became an attorney, and he was a good attorney, very good. He had an office in Charleston, and it was right on Kanawha River. And if I get tickled and I have to smile when I think about it, because when someone would start to sue someone else, they would say, well, who is your attorney? And that's representing the other person. And they would tell them. And when they would mention my father's name, they'd say, well, I tell you what, I'm really busy, so you might want to get somebody else. Because there was nobody that would go up against him, because he won every case he had. And they were all afraid of him. And that always gave me a big kick, because it's nice to know that everybody's afraid to go up in court against your dad. And so when he was just always there, Mommy and Daddy were there at the house because he retired, and when they went out, they went together, and they were happy like that. And when I grew up that way, and when you have that situation, and your mother loves your dad so much until there's just no one else, and your dad loves your mother so much that there's no one else, and their children come first in their lives. Well, not first. God comes first, but then the children come after God. And you can't have you can't have anything better than a situation like that. And that's what I had. And then when Daddy developed this hypoglycemia, we were all concerned and everything, and they told him to take orange juice during the night. Well, to me, that was an incorrect diagnosis, as far as in my case would be, because if I were to drink orange juice, that would make my sugar fall even faster now. But that's why I'm saying they didn't know that much about the sugar back then. And so when he drank the orange juice, I'm sure that it probably just sent his sugar just plummeting even more so, and even faster. But we had been down and stayed for the weekend, and we worked away from home because my husband was a heavy equipment operator, and so we had to do a lot of traveling, and so we lived probably about 75 miles from them. And I would go probably home maybe once every 3 weeks or so, like that. And if my husband had to work over or something, I'd just get Tanya, and we'd jump in the car and take off. We'd go home and spend the weekend. So one time when Tanya was 2 years old, we were living away from home, and she kept coming up to me. I was canning because I was a lot like Mom in those situations, in that situation, because I love to can food. And I was canning peaches. Peaches or green beans, I can't remember. I think it was peaches. And, yeah, because I was blanching them. And so she would just come over to me, and she would, she was only 2, like I said, and she'd come over and she would take her hand and she'd sort of tug at my pant leg and she'd say, "Mama, Papa Chick, Papa Chick." And she couldn't even speak clearly. And she was trying to tell me that Papa was sick. And I said, "No, honey." I said, "Papa isn't sick." I said, "No, Papa's fine, honey." And she'd say, "No, no, Papa Chick." So she'd go away and she'd play for a while. And after a while, she'd come back. And she'd look at me again and she'd get my pant leg and she'd say, "Papa Chick, Papa Chick." And I said, "Honey, if Papa were sick, he would call. Or they would call, and Mama would call and let Mommy know." And so she'd go away. She was contented for a little while. And then I told my husband, I said, "I don't like the way she's going around saying that Daddy is sick all the time." I said, "I'm wondering if maybe she isn't sort of feeling," because they loved each other so much. And he always said that he had a special link with her. He said that their brains were in tune with each other, and he called her doll all the time. And she loved Mommy and Daddy dearly. And so I said, "I think I'm going to go home and see if he is sick." And he said, well, he said, "Go ahead." So I got Tanya, put her in the car, and got her clothes. We went down. And when I got there, they were sitting out. They had carport out off of the kitchen. And they were sitting out in the carport. And when I got out, Daddy was so tender-hearted. When you got ready to leave, when you had been there and you were leaving to go home or something, Mommy would come out and she'd wave and she'd say goodbye and all that stuff. Not Daddy. He would stay in the kitchen if that's where he saw you last, or in the living room, depending on wherever he saw you last. And he'd say, "So long." And he wouldn't come to the door to say goodbye to you or anything. And so the last time I had seen him, he said, "So long." And I said, "So long." And so we got out of the car, and I started around the back of the car, and I noticed that his face was really red. And I said, "Have you been sick?" And he sort of puckered up just a little bit. He was trying to keep, not cry or anything, because he was the macho man. He was really macho too. And Mommy said, "Yes," that he's been at the hospital. I said, "Then why didn't you call me?" She said, "We didn't want to worry you." And I said, "I don't care." I said, "You all didn't have to call me." I said, "Tanya's been running around pulling my pant legs, telling me that Papa was sick all for 2 days. And he looked at her, and his mouth just started trembling until it wasn't even funny, because he knew that he did have a special link with her. And I started crying. I said, "You could have called me." I said, "I don't want that to happen anymore." I said, "You get sick, you call me." I said, "I could have been here." And so then we went ahead and enjoyed the rest of the weekend and had a really good time and everything. Well, she was, like I said, 2 at the time. And it went on for a good while. And then when she was 7, she wasn't sleeping one night. And she was crying. And it's 3 o'clock in the morning. And she was just crying and crying. And I got her and I said, "What's wrong with you?" I said, "There's nothing wrong, honey." I said, "Go back to sleep." I said, "There's nothing in your bedroom," because I was going all through this, trying to reassure that there were no boogeymans and things. And she wouldn't say anything. She'd just cry. And she was crying hard. And so my husband got up, and he was trying to talk with her, and you couldn't console her. Well, it was 3 o'clock. At 3:17, the phone rang. And my husband was already up, so he got the phone. And he said, what time did it happen? And he said, 3. And he said, okay, I'll tell her. So I knew what it was. Tanya, shut up. She didn't cry anymore. And she had stopped probably about 5 minutes before the phone rang. And so he came in and told me that my father had passed away. And it's like it's a complete shock because we weren't expecting it, because he had been getting along well, and he had been really watching his diet and everything, and he hadn't been having any of those spells. He hadn't been going into a coma or anything for a good while. Like I said, it had been about 7 years since he'd been sick. But he took one of those spells and went into it, and he didn't come out of it. And my brother, he was also working away, and he always was so close to Daddy. And my brother that was there with Daddy when he passed away called my other brother, and he told him, he said, you can come home now. He said, but there's no need to drive fast. He said, just take your time. So, of course, my brother knew what was going on when he told him that, and he started off home. And just as he got to where we had a private drive over to Mom and Dad's house, and just as he started to turn down the private drive, the hearse was coming out the drive. And he said that just about got him, because he was so close to Daddy, and we all were. He was the glue that just held that family together. And Mommy was right there, part of that glue. But when we needed anything at all we had to do was just look at Daddy. If anybody, anything, any kind of a problem you had, you could go home and talk to Daddy, and he had the answer. He knew what it was. He knew legally anything. He just knew all these situations, and there was nothing you couldn't discuss with him, because he was right there to take care of things, anything that you came up against. And not that we came up against a lot of things, but there's always something that will bother you, or something, or somebody's causing you problems or something, and you're wanting to know what you should or you shouldn't do. You know how things like that happen. And he was always very in control. He never lost his temper, And he was evenly spoken, and he was a very, very, very fine man. And my mother loved him so much that you'll never know. So after he passed away, there were 8 children in our family, 3 boys and 5 girls. And the girls took more on the role of helping Mom and everything. And we would go and get her and bring her to our house and keep her for 1, 2, 3 weeks. Didn't matter, just as long as she wanted to stay. But she always, they had a redwood house. It was made out of redwood. And she'd always called her little redwood house. And she'd say, I want to go home to my little redwood house. So we would take her home, and she would stay at her house. And so she stayed there for a good while after Daddy passed away. And then she was missing him so much, though. We knew that she was missing him terribly. And one time we were out we'd gone to a different little city, probably about 50 miles from where we lived, and all the girls had gotten together, and we'd taken Mom, we'd gone out. And we'd gone in this place, in this store at the shop, and there was an eating area there. and they had music playing. And I don't know, some of you probably will remember this song. Some of you would not know what I was talking about because it's too far back for you to remember. But there was I can't remember the guy that sang the song, but it was the words were, "Put your head, lay your head on my pillow, and put your warm and tender body close to mine." We were sitting there, and all of a sudden she just broke down and just started crying and put her head down on the table. And she was crying quietly, but she was sobbing. And it just about killed us because, like I said, we all miss Daddy so terribly much. And I miss Daddy so much that when they told me that he had passed away, I couldn't remember what he even looked like. And I kept telling my husband, I kept saying, "Why can't I remember what my father looks like?" And he said, "You'll be all right. You'll be all right. You'll be okay." And I said, "But that's not normal. I should be able to remember what my daddy looks like." And he said, "You'll be okay." So we went to my brother's house. Everyone was meeting at my brother's house because we didn't go to their house, Mom and Dad's house. It would have just been too traumatic on all of us because he was always there to greet you and everything, and we just couldn't have stood it. So we met at my brother's house. He lived just up the road a piece from them. And he'd always stop and say hello when he was coming home in the evening from work. He'd stop and say hello, how are you, and all that stuff. And they look forward to that. And anyway, we got to his house, and all the rest of the kids were coming in, and two of them lived here in Florida, and they were on their way home. And the rest of them had gotten there. And they were laughing and talking about what they had done with Daddy and things that they had done and all the fun that they had had. And I thought, why can't I remember what he looks like? Why can't I remember ever having fun with him? What's wrong with me? This is not normal. And so the rest of them didn't want to go to the wake. I mean, they were hesitant. I mean, they knew they were going, but they were hesitant because it was, you know how it is about going to something like that. And where they were not wanting to go, I couldn't wait to go because I thought, I want to see what this man looks like that I can't remember. It's as though he had never existed to me. And so I got there and walked up and looked down. And then I knew why I couldn't remember. It was too much. It was just too much because I had loved him too much. And he was too precious to me to lose. And that's why I couldn't remember not ever having seen him. And so then I knew that it had to be a big responsibility on me to see that Mommy was as happy as we could make her. And like I said, two of the kids lived here in Florida, and then 6 of us lived back there. And 2 of them were guys, so they were working all the time. They couldn't do anything. So it basically was left up to 2 to 3 of us girls to take care of Mommy. So, but she was no problem because when she'd come to your house, you get a load of clothes out of your dryer. She wanted to sit there, and she was her happiest if you would allow her to fold your clothes for you. And she loved to do anything. And of course, she loved cooking, like I said. And of course, we did all the cooking, so she didn't get to do much of the cooking. And I remember one night we were outside working on something, my husband and I were, and I said, "Mommy," I said, "would you mind fixing us some hamburgers?" I said, it's going to be a while before I can come in to cook, and we're going to all be starving. And she said, no, she said, I'd love to do it. So she ran in the kitchen, and she delighted in fixing those hamburgers and things for us so that we would all have something to eat. She loved it. She had a talent for doing things. She had never had any formal training or anything for crafting, but she knew cross-stitch, she knew crochet, she knew she could decorate cakes and make the prettiest roses you've ever seen, and never had a lesson one in her life. And she could cook until everyone far and wide would come to eat her food that she cooked. And when they would have bake sales, our church would have bake sales, they would go for her cakes and pies first. And one Saturday, they were having a bake sale, and she took up a bunch of pies and cakes. And before she left, they had already sold hers, and they asked her if she could go home and bake more pies and cakes. So she had to run home and bake some more pies and cakes. And that's just the way she was. She was happiest when she was working. That was Mom. And she was a Christian. She never talked about people. She didn't talk about people. She always had something good to say about them. And she went to church faithfully. They both went to church. Daddy was a deacon in the church. And so was my brother. And that's what I grew up with. I grew up with Daddy in the evening. When it was near bedtime, he would call the children around in the living room. And you would sit down on the couch or wherever, in the floor, and he would get his Bible. And he would read a chapter in the Bible to us every night. Every night. And at the time, I was probably about 7 years old or something like that. And you know how children are. I couldn't wait for that Bible to get over with because it was interfering with my doing what I wanted to do. So now I look back at it and I wish I could go back and live those days over again. But he would read that chapter in the Bible, and then he would get down on his knees, and Mommy would get on her knees, and we had to get on our knees, and he prayed a prayer before we went to bed. And that's how I was brought up. That's the whole thing in a nutshell. And so I grew up with those morals, and I still have those morals. I taught those to my children. I've taught them to be good people. Don't hurt anyone. Do good for those that you can. And that's the way I'm talking with Sophie. I tell her the same thing. Do only good, don't do evil for people. And so it's just it's something, but Mommy was so lonely. She was terribly lonely for Daddy. And she was a pretty woman. She was a very pretty woman. She was immaculate when she was dressed and ready to go out. She had on her earrings, and she had on her makeup. And Daddy, before he passed away, I was her hairdresser because, like I said, I took after Mommy and Daddy. I did. I was doing everything. I did the cross-stitch and the, I just did it with that when I was about 5 years old, though. And I had to learn later on when I really wanted to do the big cross-stitch. And, but I gave Mom permanents. I gave myself permanents. I bleached my own hair. I frosted my own hair. I made drapes. I made anything I wanted to make, I could make it. And that's the way Mommy was. There was nothing that she couldn't sew. And I have another sister, Betty. She was the same way. She made drapes like I have in my house here. She had about 3,200 square foot house, I think it was, and she made drapes. One of her windows was 8 feet long, and she made drapes with the swags for that, all the house, including that. And they were gorgeous, and she made the most beautiful black fur coat that you've ever seen, with a collar that would come up over above your ears when you pull it up around your ears if it was cold. And it looked so expensive. But and she canned, and she put stuff in the freezer, and just everything. And so anyway, Mommy was, she was just like that, and it came so easy for her, just like, and it came easy for us. Now, there were a couple of us girls that couldn't sew and couldn't do too many of the crafts and things, but most of us could. And so we noticed that Mommy was beginning to get very forgetful. And one time she, like I said, she was a fanatic about cleaning her house. And one time she was trying to clean her windows. And she had a chair, and she put a hassock on top of the chair. And then she got on top of the hassock, and she was trying to wash her windows because it was up at the top. And she fell and she broke her wrist. And, oh, I got so upset. And I said, don't you ever, ever do anything like that again. I said, you will hurt yourself seriously. I mean, a broken wrist is bad enough. And, but I was afraid she'd do something to her head or something. Or her back or something. And so we noticed that her mind was getting worse. And she was getting more and more that she liked to go over things that she would tell over and over, and she wanted to repeat them and everything. And we figured that she was developing Alzheimer's. So we took her for a checkup. And they said that her brain definitely was shrinking. So we had to face the fact that now our mother was in the beginning stages of Alzheimer's. And so she would come to my house, and she would stay for a couple of weeks at a time. And she was so used to my things that were set around in my house that she had, after some later time, but had passed, she thought that they were her things because she had just been around them so much. And we were going to, when we would go on vacation, we'd always go and get her and take her on vacation with us. And we always came down here, and one of my sisters lived down here. So I had 2 brothers and a sister, and we would bring her down to visit. And she loved to come and visit, but one time I had had surgery. It seems to me like I'm always having surgery, but I had to have a hysterectomy. And so I had my hysterectomy, and 6 weeks later, I got up and I cleaned my whole house from one end to the other, and I knew that we were coming on vacation. And so I got my sisters together, or 2 of them, and Tanya and Mommy, and we all headed for Florida. And so my one sister, she was hilarious, Pat. She would tickle you to death, but you'd get a little bit aggravated too. But she wanted to just keep on driving to get as far as we could the first night and the first day. And I said, well, now, I have driven there enough that I know that if we get within 100 miles of Atlanta and it's very late, we're not going to find a room to stay. Oh, we'll find a room, don't you worry about it. We will find a room. And I said, okay, just wanted to warn you guys. So we kept on driving and driving and driving and still driving. At 4 o'clock that morning, we found a place to stay. And believe me, everyone was happy and contented to be getting a place to stay. So we walked in and we went to bed. At we stopped at 4, so by the time we got in bed, I'd say it was probably 15 to 5. At 6 o'clock, Mom was up, and she was going, "Okay, everybody that's leaving and going home, they better be getting up because this car is leaving for home." And I said, "Mommy, we haven't even been anywhere yet. We haven't even gotten to Florida yet." And she looked at me and she said, "Oh," said, "we've already been down there." And I said, "No, Mommy, we haven't been to Florida yet." I said, "And I'm totally exhausted." I said, "May I please sleep a couple hours before I have to get up?" And she looked at me, and I guess she could tell that I was really tired because I don't think I was as well from that surgery as what I thought I was. I hadn't recuperated long enough to clean my entire house. And when I do spring cleaning, everything comes out of each room, and the walls are cleaned down, and the beds are cleaned under, and everything. And it's every room like that. So I don't think I should have done that before I left on vacation either, but that was just me. So she looked at me and she said, "Oh," she said, "I'm sorry." She said, "Go back to sleep." She said, "I won't wake you up again." And she was always so sorry when she would come to herself and realize what it was. She had gone into one of these lapses that she had, whatever. And she thought that we had been to Florida and had vacation and everything, and we were on our way home now. So then we came on after we rested. We got up and went to eat and everything, and then we went back home after we spent almost 2 weeks vacation, and then we went back home. But it kept getting worse and worse, and so it got to where two of us, no, three of us, my sister and I, and one of my brothers, he lived beside me because we usually lived near, side by side each other. It just worked out that way. He was the next in line after I was born, he was born, and then I was the last one to be born. And so we just seemed to have, it just seemed to work out that way. We always lived beside each other. And so we had been in business, and there was some property beside him. He had moved and built a new house, and we found out that this property was for sale beside him. There were 2 acres there for sale. Well, it was 2 1/4 acres. And so we go up and buy the 2 acres and build our house right. I think we had about 200 and some feet between us. And so he and my other sister and I started taking care of Mom, because by this time you couldn't trust her to stay at home because we were afraid she'd be hurt, and she, of course, couldn't eat properly. So my sister would take her. She lived about 30 miles from us, and she would come up and get her and take her home and keep her down to her house for about 2 weeks, and then she'd bring her back. And my brother would keep her for 2 weeks, and then I would take her for 2 weeks and keep her. And it worked out well for a while, but it seemed after this certain place in her sickness, it started progressing very quickly. And like I said, you all that have seen my home videos have probably seen I have a little clock, and it's not so little, it's about 2 foot tall, clock that sits on my mantle. And it looks like a church, and that's why I bought it, because it reminded me of a church, and I loved it. And it's about 45 years old now. And it doesn't look it, but it is. And she loved that clock. And one night she got up, and it was 3 o'clock in the morning, and she went in, and she was up on my hearth reaching up to get my clock down because she thought it was hers. And she was ready to go home, so she was taking her clock with her. And I went in there and I said, she always slept with me when she came to stay with us because that way I could keep up with her and I could tell when she got up. And the master bath was right there beside, just right off of my bedroom. And if she needed to go to the bathroom, I could steer her right in the right direction and everything. So it just made it a lot easier than giving her a bedroom away from me. So she always slept with me. And so she got up and she started trying to collect her things and her clothes. And I said, Mommy, I said, you can't go out. I said, it's only 3 o'clock in the morning. And I said, you can't take that clock. I said, you have to leave that here. And she said, I want to go home. And she said, you're not going to keep me here. And I thought, oh, this is something new. And I said, well, why don't you, I knew then she didn't know who I was. And because she would never have spoken to me like that. And she said, I said, why don't you let me call Gene? And that's my brother. And I said, he can tell you who I am and tell you that it's all right and that you need to go back to bed. And she said, I don't need you to talk to Eugene. She knew his right name. I said, well, I'm going to call him and let you talk with him. So I called him and he talked to her and he said, Mom, he said, that's Joan. He said, that's not some other woman. He said, that's Joan. And she would look at me sort of funny like, I don't know what they're trying to pull on me because her voice sounds familiar, but when I look at her, she doesn't look like Joan. And so he finally talked her into who I was. And I got my clock and put it back up on the mantle and put her back in bed. And from there on, it just went down worse and worse and worse. And one time in particular, I remember, before it got too much worse, my nephews was getting married, and that was Jean's son. And she was always really close to them because they lived really close to her all the time. And the grandchildren that live the closest to you, you know more about what they're doing. It seems like you're a little closer to them than you are the other. You love the others dearly, but you just are closer some way. And so he was getting married. And I thought, okay, I know what's coming. I know what's facing me. So I'm going to take care of this situation now. And so I called all the girls. And I said, I want us to all go shopping with Mommy. I said, we have to get her a real pretty new dress anyway for the wedding. And I said, I don't want her to know it, though. I said, but after we pick the dress out that we like and that she likes, it was very, very important that she liked it because she passed her opinion on her clothing, too. So I said, I'm going to take the dress after she wears it, after she has a really good time with the dress on. I said, then I'm going to put it and her shoes and everything away. And I'm going to keep it. And I said, she will never know the difference. So they all thought that that was a good idea. And she had a lot of clothes, but I was just, I get things set in my mind, and once they're set there, you might as well just be quiet. I'm not going to change my mind about it because it's something that needs to be done, or I wouldn't have it in my mind. And I follow through with it. So we went to town and took her, all the girls, and we had a really good time. We had lunch, And we shopped with her and shopped, and she enjoyed that with all the girls and them laughing and talking and everything. And her trying on dresses. And we all finally decided on this one dress, and she loved it. I mean, she dearly loved it. It was, the top of it had 3/4 length sleeves, and it was a sort of a, it's hard to describe the brown that it was. It was a light tannish brown, but you could see through it somewhat. But it had a deep, deep purple floral design to it, but it was sort of abstract, the floral design to it was. And it had a sort of a camel skirt, a little bit darker than a camel skirt that went with it, but it was all one piece. And then her top bloused out, and the neck sort of folded back like my neck does right now. And then it fitted her loose around her midriff. And then it had a little round tie that tied around her waist, easy tie. And then there was a flounce to her blouse that went over her skirt. And we got her a pair of shoes that were the same color as the skirt was. And we got her gloves and everything to go with it. And oh, she loved that dress. She looked so, her hair was snow white. And it had been snow white from the time, she said she started getting gray when she was 19. And it had always been snow white from the time I could remember. And I get so tickled when I think of what my mother-in-law used to tell me, because she liked her hair dyed dark, and she didn't want any gray hair. And she would say, "Oh, I wish my hair was just as white as your mother's hair is." And she'd say, because I would love to have white hair like that. But I knew that she dyed it all the time, but I never said anything because it's not my place to say anything. And if she wanted her hair black, it wasn't even my business anyway. And she looked nice the way she was, so it wasn't, it just always, I just always sort of laughed about it because she always said she'd love to have hair the color of Mommy's. And Mommy didn't pay any attention to the white hair, but as long as it was fixed. But she had to have her hair fixed all the time. And when she was, Daddy was living, he would call me, or Mommy would call me. And he would tell her, he'd say, "You call Joan and tell her to come down and fix your hair. You're going to have a permanent." She didn't go to the beauty shop to get her permanents. I gave her permanents, and I gave myself my own permanents. And they always turned out well. And when her hair got to the place that it needed a permanent and needed to be cut, call Joan and tell her to come down and fix your hair for you. So that's what she would do. So that I took care of Mommy's hair all of her life, from the time I got probably 12 years old. And she trusted me. But I didn't let her down. But anyway, I cut her hair, gave her a pretty permanent, and fixed her hair real pretty, put her makeup on her, put her some nice earrings in, and she had her nice watch and her wedding rings and everything on, and her pretty dress, and she went to her little grandson's wedding. He wasn't so little. He was a good-looking thing. Had coal-black hair and dark eyes, and had this mischievous grin when he would look at you like he was just going to bite your ear off or something. And he was a good-looking guy. And she got to go to his wedding and had her picture taken with the other grandmothers, because his wife's grandmothers, she had two grandmothers there. He only had one, but because Mom was the only one living. And but she got her picture taken with the other grandmothers, and that made her very proud. And then we went to the reception, and they had an outdoor reception with a big canopy and the whole 9 yards. And this one man, older man, very, very old, was sitting over there nicely dressed and everything, but I noticed he kept watching Mom because she looked really pretty. I mean, she looked beautiful. And she always looked so elegant. And she had the manners that went with it, too. And so, of course, she's all the time meeting the judges that Daddy introduced her to and everything. So she knew how to conduct herself. So anyway, she must have noticed him watching her. And she looked over at me and she said, he might as well just look on. And she said, I'm not interested. Said, I had my husband, and said, I'm not interested in anybody else. And I started laughing because my other sister heard that too. And we both just cracked up. We started laughing. But the men would do that to her, but she wouldn't even look at them. She would just walk on by. And because she had her one true love. And if there was ever a one true love, Daddy always told me, he said, Joan, he said, the way that, they call me Joni a lot of times. A lot of my family call me Joni. That's why I have Joni on my thing. Joni, the way you can tell true love is when you love and you have true love, you each love each other the same amount. One does not love one more than the other, and one does not cause problems for the other. And I always thought about that after he told me that, because it is true. True love. And they had the closest thing to true love, I guess, that I have ever seen, unless I'm forgetting about somebody's other than mine. We had true love, but it did not go like Mommy and Daddy's true love did go. Because when he was in service, she had never ridden a train before, because that was back in the 30s. And they'd gotten married, and after he had gone into service, he came home for furlough, and she got pregnant, and then he went back to, I think it was Camp Lejeune, North Carolina, something like that, because we heard these stories all the time, and you get to where you just don't pay any attention, and you really should pay attention to everything that's said and take notes and get your recorder, because now I would love to have all this information. And she got on a train that she had never ridden before, never been out of the state before, and went by herself with the baby, and he was only 6 weeks old. She had a lot of guts. She had a lot of guts. She got more than I had. I wouldn't have taken off with a 6 weeks old child on something I had never ridden on before. Going into a situation I had never been in before. And so she left, and they rode through the night or whenever, and got there to North Carolina, and he doesn't know she's anywhere around. She didn't even tell him that she was coming. And she gets there, and she goes up to the base. And she got one of the guards, and she said, could you tell me where, and she gave my father's name, where he is. You can go tell him that his wife and his child is here. He probably thought, what in the world is this woman doing? And so anyway, he goes and finds Daddy, and Daddy is drilling a bunch of troops. And he said that this guy walks up to him and he said, sir, I hate to bother you, but your wife is outside the gates. She's waiting for you at the gates. And Daddy said, he said, my wife. He said, yes, said she has your child with her. And he said, he'd never seen the baby. He wasn't there when it was born. And it thrilled him to death. But he still was stunned over the fact that she had taken off like that and not told him that she was coming. And that she got there with, I guess he was thinking she was able to get there and find him where he was. And so he got someone else to take over his platoon that he was drilling. And he walked over, went straight over to where she was, and he started talking to her. And he said, okay, he said, I will tell them what's going on, and I will go and get you a hotel room. And then I'll have to come back. I can't stay with you. Because she thought he was going to be able to stay with her. And so he gets excused, and he goes and gets them a room. And he says, now, his mind is already clicking. Like I said, he's a very intelligent man. So he's got this brain clicking, clicking, clicking. And he said, I will be back tonight, even though he wasn't supposed to be back tonight. And she said, okay. So he goes through this whole elaborate thing, how he got off of that base. And he told us how he did it, but I can't remember how he did it. He switched a bunch of things and did a bunch of other things, and he walked right off of the base. Was never missed or anything else. And he went to her room, and he started knocking on the door, and he couldn't get anyone to answer the door. She wouldn't come to the door. And he couldn't hear anything. Oh, there was a transom over the door. And for you, those of you, if you don't know what a transom is, it's a glass little door that opens out up there over your main door. So he gets something and climbs up on it in the hallway and looks through, and there she is on the bed with the baby, and she's asleep and he's asleep. She was totally exhausted. I would say physically and mentally both. She was just exhausted. So he climbs through that transom. A big guy, too. He was a big guy. He's tall and muscular. Good-looking guy. Oh, my gosh, he was a good-looking guy. And he got in there, and he got her awake, and he took them out to eat. And he stayed with her that night, and he stayed with her every night she was there, I think it was 9 days or something like that. And he had slipped out of that base every night that she had been there and stayed with them because he was thrilled to death to see the baby because he had a little boy and he hadn't even gotten to see him and didn't get to see him born or anything. And he saw his wife that he dearly loved. And if you would know what he went through to get his wife, because